Hello, I'm Jyotika. Welcome back to lesson 1 for AS Psychology. This is part 2 of the lesson in which we are going to be practicing identifying independent variables for paper 2 questions, that is for unseen research stimuli. In part 1 of the lesson, I have covered the theory part of independent variables. I have explained to you what independent variables are, what their levels are. Please watch that part if you haven't done so already. I'm linking it in the description box below. If you watch that part, you'll be able to make complete sense of what we are doing right now. In this part, we are going to be looking at research scenarios like the one you see on your screen right now. These are the kind of questions that come in paper 2, and very shortly I will be solving in this video itself this type of questions and similar type of questions in past papers. But before that, we need to look at guidelines as to how to exactly identify independent variables in these past papers. I want to tell you here that paper 2 is a skill-based paper in psychology. It is not rote learning based paper, neither is paper 1, but some students take that approach to paper 1 and to some extent they are successful. Because yes, you can answer that paper to some extent by just memorizing certain facts about core studies. In paper 2, you're going to come across such questions that you cannot answer by memorization. Many students, I don't know why, I believe it is because in other subjects, some of their subjects, they have this practice of memorizing past paper answers, that they expect that when I'm teaching them how to solve past papers, I'm teaching them with the help of past papers in psychology, they can simply learn, that is memorize the answers that we are preparing in the class and go to their final answer paper. Well, that does not work out. You can for yourself look at the past papers of AS Psychology, and there are many available for your batch because your batch is the last one which is attempting this particular syllabus. You will be able to see for yourself that no question in paper 2 especially has ever been repeated. Paper 2 consists of unseen research scenarios, like you have unseen passages in your language papers, so they're never repeated from one year to the next. Simply saying you have no option but to develop the skill of being able to identify independent variables, experimental designs, type of studies, whatever it is given in the syllabus. You simply cannot have this expectation that you'll memorize and go for the exam paper. This tendency of wanting to rote learn is what brings down students' marks in psychology. Okay, so right now you're going to be seeing guidelines with me. And when I show students these guidelines, some of them feel that it's going to be a big effort for just 1-2 mark questions. They have to put in so much effort and they have to try so hard. One thing is, these guidelines are super simple. There's nothing difficult about them. Second, you have to practice them mentally. You do not have to write them down like I am doing right now, because I'm teaching you. I'm being explicit, I'm demonstrating something to you, so I'm going to take my time explaining them and I'm going to write certain things manually. You don't have to do any of that. You just have to use these guidelines in your head. And thirdly, what I've seen is students use these guidelines for just 2 or at the most 3 stimuli that I present to them, and then these guidelines train them so well that automatically they are able to identify independent variables. So whatever efforts we are going to put into learning these guidelines right now is very minimal effort that we must put right now. Otherwise, later on you're going to regret it a lot. So just before the paper, when you will sit with the past papers and you won't be able to identify independent variables in any of those, you will regret not taking your time to learn the guidelines at the beginning. So please take this seriously and learn along with me. Okay, so how do we identify an independent variable when we have an unseen passage in front of us? The first thing we do is we identify the purpose of conducting the experiment in the stimulus which is given. Simply saying, I ask myself, why has this researcher why has this experimenter conducted this experiment? Very shortly, I'll be showing to you a lot of different examples of research stimuli given in the paper. Right now, let's just take, I'm just putting an excerpt here, very small one, just for having an example to explain these guidelines to you. Okay, supposing a researcher is studying whether people are more violent when it is summer as compared to when it is winter. Okay, this is not how scenarios are presented. I just showed you a scenario a while back. There's a few more details in those scenarios, but here I've just presented a gist to have a running example as I present these guidelines. Now, the first thing I do when I have a scenario of this kind in front of me in the paper is, in my mind, I ask myself, why has the experimenter conducted this study? So, in my own words, I tell myself what the purpose is of conducting the experiment. So, I tell myself, the experimenter wants to study whether violence is somewhere being caused or determined by the season which is there outside. This is what I am understanding as the purpose. Your wording could be different, your way of thinking could be different. It's just that I want you to pay full attention to the scenario and translate it in your own words to your mind. Make sure you're understanding why the researcher has conducted the experiment. Once you've done this, whatever purpose you've understood, you need to phrase it in a certain way. So I've presented a template here, which is to investigate the effect of dash on dash. What you want to do now is, once you know the purpose, you've understood it, you want to put it into these terms. Again, you need not write it in your notebook or your exam paper. You have to do this practice mentally. So what you tell yourself is what the researcher wanted to investigate, the effect of what on what. So I would answer this that the experimenter wanted to study the effect of the season on violence. Now, whatever I fill into this first blank is the independent variable. Whatever I fill into the second blank is the dependent variable. As of now, our discussion is about the independent variable, so I'll strictly keep my focus on that. Okay. Some students have this tendency, I've noticed, in fact, many of them, they are able to identify variables in a scenario, but they tend to interchange the independent variable and the dependent variable. So many a times when we are doing this practice, a student will tell me that violence is the independent variable. And when I ask them to check themselves, they are not able to understand whether violence is correctly the independent variable or not. For such students who get confused, if you are one of them, I recommend you use the second format that I have presented, the second template rather than the first one. Here what you do is, whatever purpose you've identified of the study, you phrase it as to study the dash as a cause of dash. Okay, so same thing you have to do what we did with the previous template, just put in the purpose in these terms, what are presented here. Now, if you put it in as to study the effect of violence on the season as a cause of the season, does it make sense? Does the researcher think that it is summer because people are violent, or it is winter because people are not violent? No, what I understood the purpose of the study to be in the first step is not matching with what I have written here. So what happens is, if I tend to confuse the IV and the DV, using this format immediately tells me that I'm making a mistake. Okay, so immediately what I need to do if I've made the mistake is, I can just interchange the blanks that I have filled in. So I can say I want to study the effect of, I want to study season as a cause of violence, and there I have my correct answer. Okay, so regardless of which template you use, once you know the purpose of the study and you have understood what your IV is by filling in the first blank, you're ready to come towards the next step. Here what you need to do is identify the different ways in which the independent variable has been manipulated or measured. If you want to know what this manipulation and measurement is, if you're not able to understand right now, please visit the previous part of the lesson. Okay, here we can see in this particular scenario, the researcher has clearly measured the independent variable. He has not manipulated it because he does not decide when it is summer and when it is winter. So what I can tell myself is that the independent variable is season, and the researcher has measured it as either summer or winter. So these are two ways in which he has measured the season. Okay, coming to the next point. Okay, students get the hang of this very fast, these first three steps, because they are very simple. Then they ask me, should I just say the variable is season? Do I need to add something to that? Do I need to put something before the word season when I write my answer? Well, if you just write season, going by the system of marking in the exam papers, it will not be marked incorrect. So if you just say season, you will get your marks for writing season. But it is good practice, let me tell you, that whenever you name an independent variable, you should specify which attribute of it has been manipulated or measured by the researcher. See, let's take this example only, season. In this particular study, we can see the researcher has studied the type of season. So either he studied winter or summer. Is there anything else he could have measured about the season? He could have measured the duration of the season. For example, he could have studied whether in countries where there is a long summer, people tend to be more violent, or in countries where there is a short summer, people tend to be more violent. So he could have studied duration instead of the type. When it comes to any variable, independent or dependent, there are different attributes of it that researchers could study. So two researchers could be manipulating or measuring the same independent variable, but they could study different aspects of it, like I've given you the example here. So it's always good practice to specify which attribute of the independent variable has been studied. To make this, to give you an idea of which attributes could be manipulated, I've given some examples here. So type, time, speed, etc. You can read these. These are the typical attributes or features of an independent variable that are manipulated or measured by a researcher. You need not memorize this list. You can just read through it to familiarize yourself with which attributes are typically seen in studies. As we keep on practicing, as we look at so many different scenarios and we see, we practice naming different independent variables, trust me, you will, get the hang of it, or you will get a pattern or an idea of how, which features are typically manipulated in studies. So it's just a matter of exposure. You do a little practice, you come across a few exercises, and you will be able to see for yourself. Okay, next is you need to state the levels at which the independent variable has been manipulated or measured. Okay, we've already seen that just naming the independent variable is not enough. I know now that the independent variable is type of season, but I cannot just write type of season in the paper. I need to write what were the levels at which it was manipulated. So if I look at the research scenario again and I see what the levels were, I've already identified the ways. So ways and levels are the same. Don't worry about the nomenclature of the levels. Levels you can simply call as summer and winter. There are no attributes or features that you need to identify in the levels of an independent variable. Levels, just name them as they are. So as you've identified the ways in the third step, in the same way you can name the levels over here. Okay, with this we are ready to start practicing identifying independent variables in the past papers with these guidelines. Before that, but what I do is, and students like this, they always tell me they want to see some sample answers. They are a little hesitant before directly answering any questions in the paper. They like to see some model answers so that they get an idea of how to present answers themselves. So here are some samples for answer writing. These are not from the past papers. These are just for your understanding. What I'll do is I'll just read out the research scenarios and we'll see how the answer has been phrased for these scenarios. The question is the same in all of these. The question is simply identify the independent variable. Okay, let's look at the first scenario. Paula conducted an experiment in which she asked only some of her participants to dance and not others. Then she measured the aggression level of participants. What is the purpose of Paula's study? She wants to see whether participants who dance will have aggression levels different from participants who do not dance, right? So what does she want to study? Dash as a cause of dash. She wants to study dance as a cause of aggression. We've been seeing from the last lesson, cause is called an IV. So definitely dancing is her IV. What has she measured about dance? Has she measured the type of dance that participants were performing? Jazz or salsa? No. Has she measured for how long they were dancing? So were some participants dancing for a shorter period of time and some for a longer period of time? No. She simply measured whether they had been dancing or not dancing. So we can simply say she's measured performance of dance. And which are the different ways in which she has measured this performance of dance? She's measured it either as dancing or not dancing. Okay, so let's see how we can phrase this answer. We can say that the independent variable is performance of dance manipulated at two levels, dance and no dance. So simply this is how we need to present our answer. Let's look at the next scenario now. George asked some individuals to first memorize a list of states of their own country. The next day he asked them to memorize a list of states of a neighboring country. He then compared their performances on the 2 days and found that their memory was better for the names of their own country's states. Why has George conducted this study? What is the purpose? He wants to see whether people remember names of states of their own countries more than names of states of a neighboring country. So I can say that George wanted to study the effect of name of countries on, please excuse me for a minute. So he wanted to study the effect of name of countries on the recall or memory of participants. What about the name of countries did he want to measure? Did he want to measure how long the names are? So lengthier names and shorter names? No, he wanted to study the type of the names. So type as in whether they were the names of their own country or of a neighboring country. Right? So keeping all these answers to our guideline, steps of the guideline that we have seen, we see how the answer has been written. Okay, we see that the independent variable is types of lists of states. We could say types of names of states as well. Don't get too worried about what you're calling the independent variable as long as you're correct in what you're calling it. There's no one fixed way of naming or calling the independent variable. We can simply say types of lists of states. What are the levels of it? So at two levels, own country and neighboring country. Okay, let's look at the next scenario. Robin asked some middle-aged people and some youngsters to solve crossword puzzles. He then tested which group was faster in solving. Why has Robin conducted his study? To see whether middle-aged people will solve crossword puzzles faster or whether youngsters will solve them faster. So he's studying age, right? It's clear he's studying age as a cause of speed of solving puzzles. See, once you know the guidelines, so quickly you can think of the answers. You don't need to go through each step of the guideline. I'm sure by now you have understood, you're able to use it very quickly. Okay, so he's studying the effect of age on speed of solving, and at how many levels or in how many ways has he measured age, either as middle age or as youth, young age. Okay, so let's see how this answer can be phrased. The independent variable is age of participant, measured at two levels, middle age and youth. Okay, so these were just some sample scenarios for you to be able to get a hang of how to write your answers. Now coming to solving the past papers. Okay. We're going to be solving past papers. If you want to know which paper I'm solving, at the footnote part of the paper we always see which paper it is. So this is the May-June 2018 paper, the third variant of it. Okay, what we need to do is practice the guidelines. For better understanding for you, I have pasted in the template of guidelines on the page, and I will be filling it and showing it to you what your thought process should be. Though I do expect that by now most of you must have already understood how you should be going about identifying the IV. Okay, here we see the research scenario tells us Albert is investigating autism. He plans to obtain a sample of people with autism and a control group. He will compare how well these participants judge the feelings of dolls which are either dancing, crying, waving or smiling. Now they've simply asked us identify the independent variable in this experiment. Okay, first I ask myself, what is the purpose of Albert conducting his study? So I understand that Albert wants to study whether people who are autistic will be able to judge the feelings of dolls better, or whether people who are in a control group. Control group, as you learn in your syllabus further, is simply that group which is missing something. Either it's not given a treatment, or it is simply lacking in something. It's not having something that the researcher is directly interested in. So here these are the people who are not having autism. So coming back to what is the purpose of the study, in my own words, I would say whether people who have autism are able to judge feelings of dolls better, or people who don't have autism, they are able to judge the feelings of doll better. Okay, now what we need to do is put it into one of these templates. So I would say that Albert wants to study autism as a cause of judgment of feelings of dolls. For shorthand, I'm just writing judgment of feelings. Okay. Next thing I need to do is identify the ways in which the IV was manipulated. Okay, so either participants had autism or they did not have autism. So there are two different ways, autism or not. So it was measured in these two different ways. Next, what I have to do is name the independent variable by specifying its attribute that was measured. Did the researcher measure how severe participants' autism was? No. Did he measure since how many years they were having autism? No. So he did not measure severity. He did not measure duration. What did he measure? He simply measured whether they had autism or not. So presence or absence of autism is all he has studied. So the attribute he studied is presence or absence. Okay, and what are the levels at which he has measured this independent variable? That we have seen in step 3. Either the presence of autism or absence of autism. Okay, let's see how to write this answer. Please write along with me. Take the paper number which I had shown you earlier in your notebook. So take it as May June 2018, paper 3, that is paper 2 variant 3. Take the question number as 8A. Okay, now the samples I showed you for answer writing, that is the ideal way of writing the answers, but we see we don't have that much space in the question paper. And yes, Cambridge does recommend that you directly write answers, avoiding words which are just there for grammatical purpose. So I'll show you now how you should write the answer in your exam paper, exactly how you should write it. Okay, so what we'll write it as we'll just write the name of the IV directly first. So I'll write it as presence of autism. Okay, so instead of writing the independent variable words, I'm just writing presence of autism. I can just say at 2 levels, or I like to put it as measured at 2 levels. It's your choice. You could just say at 2 levels. Don't write the word measured if you don't want. I'll put a hyphen here. Then I write 1. So 1 is presence. So that was the first way or the first level. Second, absence. Okay, so this is how I answer the question. Let's come to another question for good practice. Take the paper number in your notebook right away. This is the May-June 2019 paper variant 1. Zoe is investigating how quickly fish learn to respond to different colored lights. She trains fish in 2 tanks to swim to the end of the tank for food in response to a light. She uses a red light with one tank and a green light with another tank. She times how quickly the fish swim to the end of the tank. Okay, we are going to be attempting question B here. So take it as 8B. Firstly, we need to identify the purpose of conducting the experiment. Why has Zoe conducting the experiment? In my mind, she wants to see whether fish who are trained with green light would swim faster than fish who are trained in red light. Okay, so I would think of it as to investigate the effect of light on speed of swimming. Okay, next I need to identify what are the ways in which she has manipulated or measured the lighting. Here she's clearly manipulated the IV. So she has manipulated light as either the color green or the color red. So if I look at the scenario clearly, I can see there were 2 ways in which she presented the light. When I'm asking myself how she manipulated, how did she present the light? Next, I need to identify which attribute of light did she manipulate. Did she manipulate the brightness of the light? No. She manipulated the color of the light. So the color was either green or red. And finally, I need to state the levels at which she manipulated the color of the light. So she manipulated the color as either green or red. Now I'm ready to write my answer. Again, I'll be very direct with it. It's a 1-mark answer, but I will not only name the independent variable. I reiterate, I will also name the levels of the independent variable. Okay, so I name the independent variable directly. Color of light manipulated at 2 levels. Levels I write directly. Green, red. Okay, let's practice one more. Take down the paper number immediately. October-November 2019 paper, variant 3. Question 8A. I read out the scenario first. Olivia is conducting an experiment to investigate whether students concentrate better in class before or after eating. Her experimental design is a repeated measures design. Identify the independent variable in this experiment. What is the purpose of Olivia's experiment? She wants to see whether students are more concentrated if they've eaten before class or if they're going to eat after class. So I think she wants to study effect of eating, or eating as a cause of concentration. What are the ways in which she has manipulated or measured her IV? She's measured her IV and she's manipulated, or we don't know what she's done. But if we are not sure whether she's manipulated or measured, if that is not clear from the scenario, we'll just say measured. Okay, so I'll take it as she has measured. That's a safe one to take. Okay, so I'll say she's measured her independent variable as either eating before class or after class, like I noted earlier. Okay, what attribute of eating has she measured? Has she measured the quantity of eating? How much participants ate? No. Has she measured which type of food they ate? Whether they ate junk food or nutritious food? No. What has she measured? She has measured the timing of eating. Okay, so I'll keep this in mind. And finally, I need the levels at which she has measured this timing of eating. So there are 2 levels, before and after class. I'm ready to write my answer now. So I'll write it by naming the independent variable first. Time of eating at 2 levels. I'll say measured at 2 levels. Before class and after class. Let's practice one more. The paper number is February-March 2021, variant 2. It's February-March, so it's going to be variant 2. Okay, coming to the guidelines again, coming to the scenario again. Dr. Malt is testing whether a new drug to improve attention in mental health patients is better than an old drug. In her experiment, she is measuring the patient's attention to a stimulus. The wording of the question given here is slightly different, but the task we are required to do is exactly the same. We have to identify what is the independent variable in Dr. Malt's study. The question that has been added before that is a purely descriptive question. So we'll get 1 mark for this descriptive, but 1 mark we'll get for our application. Okay, let's answer the first part first. This part, how I'm answering this, is from the previous part of lesson 1. So you can look at that video. In that I had defined an independent variable. I'm simply presenting that definition here in the same words. An independent variable is that variable in an experiment which brings about a change in the dependent variable. Whenever we write a little lengthy answer, we can definitely underline its main part so that the examiner can read through it quickly. So for the ease of the examiner, for his convenience. Okay, now the same thing which we do all the time, we identify the independent variable in Dr. Malt's study. Why did Dr. Malt conduct her study? To see whether participants who have taken a new drug will be more attentive, I think. Yeah, attentive. Or whether participants who have taken an old drug will be more attentive. So I'll phrase it as she wanted to study drug as a cause of attention. Drug is my IV. What are the ways in which she manipulated the drug? Either old or new. Okay, what attribute of the drug did she manipulate? How much drug they took? No. She manipulated the type of drug they took. Either she gave them an old drug or a new drug. What are the levels in which she manipulated this type of drug as either old or new? Okay, I'm ready to write my answer. So I'll just continue here and write, for example, in Dr. Malt's study, I wish they would give a little more space here. The independent variable I forgot to abbreviate independent variable earlier. If you've done that, you can just write IV. So the independent variable was type of drug, manipulated at two levels, one old, two new. Alright, and let's do one final practice, and then we'll be sure of independent variables. What I've found is students don't even need to revise when we practice this way. When a few months later we come back to this topic, if they've practiced like this, they do really well, which we do in our classes. Okay, so then they don't need to go over everything again. They still remember after a few months how to identify the independent variable. So I give them a couple of new questions after some months and they answer those correctly without having to revise this lesson. Okay, take down the paper number as October-November 2021 variant 2. Question number is 7A. Zain is conducting a laboratory experiment to investigate the effects of lighting on attention. The participant's attention will be tested using a listening task in either bright light or dim light. Okay, we as always have to identify the independent variable, and somehow the space given here is lesser than before. Okay, we need to identify the purpose of conducting the experiment first. Why has Zain conducted his experiment? To study whether participants who are under bright light would be more attentive, or participants who are studying under dim light will be more attentive. That's what he wants to study. So I could think of it as lighting as a cause of attention. What are the ways in which he has manipulated lighting? Either he's presented participants with bright light or with dim light. So what attribute of lighting has he manipulated? Has he manipulated its color? No. Duration? No. Intensity. Okay, we can say brightness or we can say intensity of lighting. What are the levels at which he has manipulated this brightness? Two levels, bright and dim. This is how quick it goes in our mind. I'm speaking out, so it's taking even longer, but in your mind, this is how quickly you'll be able to identify the independent variable. Okay, so now I'll answer the question. Brightness of light manipulated at two levels. Bright, dim. Okay, with this I finish with this lesson 1, and I have nothing more to say except that practice as much as it takes. Doesn't take much, as you must have seen in this lesson, but practice well. Don't keep all the exam past paper questions for later. Like I told you, it's not a memorization test, so it's not that just before the exam you need to rote learn all the answers of the past papers. It's a skill based test. You need to develop the skills right from the beginning. You won't be able to do it just before the exam. So keep on practicing, and with that, goodbye from my side. Take care.